I've always really loved creating products. It's that challenge to create something that someone else loves. Software, hardware, marketing and technology. I think that's a theme that has carried through my life. Zapmap came out of a website called nextgreencar.com, and that was all about trying to help consumers find a low emission car. There's lots of different options out there. But then, of course, it all changed in about 2012. We knew then that electric cars were going to be the winners. It was their time. We could just see the sheer number of charge points that were being installed, and we could see that there was a real need to be able to aggregate these across networks. We need to show people where chargers are. We needed to simplify that complexity. We created a desktop map and a whole load of content around it, adding lots of ways that drivers can locate the best charger for them. Over the next couple of years, it became a really big page for us. We knew pretty early on that having live data was a critical thing. So we'd go out to the networks and say, we're Zapmap, we'd like your data, please, because we can help EV drivers. And all of them said, no, we want to keep it. We want to own the customer. And then finally, we spoke to the CEO of ChargeMaster. That was the biggest network. And he kind of got it. So he said yes. And then, like a sort of bit of a domino effect, once you get one person on board, it sort of started to go from there.
Going from a website to an app, how easy was it?
At the time, we had no idea how to create an app. We went out, found a freelancer, he created the app. We initially priced it at $4.99. People would email us and say, you've missed this charger, or I really want to see this. So we got a lot of user feedback, and we made enough money to do version 2. And then we made it free. We were overwhelmed with the amount of opportunities. We get people wanting to work with us, wanting to associate with our brand. We could see that we had something here, and there was a real need as the market was growing.
One question you probably get asked all the time, how has Tesla impacted the rest of the electric vehicle world?
Well,
Are there any roadblocks in terms of policy that are stopping Zapmap from getting where they want to go?
well, that's a big question. Policy and EVs.
Do you have any reservations about the way chargers have been rolled out so far?
I think most people would have done it slightly differently.
What does it look like to complete this transition as a culture and a civilization?
These are tricky questions just to fire at me.
Hello and welcome back to CleanTalk, the podcast shining a spotlight on inspiring companies and professionals working in and around renewable energy, clean technology and sustainability. Today we are in Bristol again, and we're back in the EV space. We're going to be speaking to the co-founder of Zapmap, Melanie Shufflebotham, and she's going to be introducing for us what their company does, and we're going to be looking into some further industry insights on where she sees the market moving as a whole. EVs are something that really interests me, and I'm keen to learn more about the contributions Zapmap has been making in this industry. So thank you for joining me today.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Melanie, we always start with a bit about our guests, a little bit of biography on their past. Can you just paint a picture of your kind of career trajectory?
When I left university, I was always really loved the idea of creating products in the tech space and finding people who, audience who love those products. I've broadly been in marketing and technology most of my career, whether that's software, sort of pre-internet software, believe it or not, hardware, networking products, and I also worked at a mobile telephone company. But interspersed within that, I've also had a few smaller little startup experiences, but then moved on to EV industry 14 years ago and haven't looked back since.
What specifically about product development and design has captivated you throughout your career?
I think it's that challenge to create something that someone else likes and loves, and then that ultimately you can create a sort of sustainable business out of.
Prior to Zapmap, can you walk us through a bit more of your ventures and your engagements career-wise?
My very first job, a company called Conduit Communications. It's going back a long way now, but really we were pre-internet, sort of a marketing systems company. So we would go out, find out what companies needed in terms of their marketing systems, and then I'd work with the software developers to create some kind of marketing system. And that was good. And ultimately, I left when I think I was employee number 3. I left when it was about 50 people, so at a similar trajectory to Zapmap. And then it actually was sold to one of the first website companies, Razorfish, probably doesn't ring a bell, but that was at the end of the 90s, that was a big website development company.
How much of a role did data and analytics play at that stage of the technological kind of revolution, if you will? That's kind of early on in the industry. A lot of what I gauge from what I've read of the Zapmap website and sort of briefing, if you will, is what you can deliver to the B2B space in data and insight. Was that more of a challenge to really do that well in the 90s and so on?
Well, I mean, in the 90s, there were still databases. People absolutely cared about data, but it just wasn't so easy to manipulate, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I'm a self-confessed data nerd. So yes, I loved all of that at the time. And I think that's sort of a theme that has carried through my life as well.
Talk to me about the founding of Zapmap. How did that come about?
Zapmap came out of a website called nextgreencar.com, and that was all about trying to help consumers find a low emission car. So back in 2010, people were making choices between biofuels, LPG, CNG, plug-in hybrids, hybrid, petrol, diesel, and electric. So there was lots of different options out there, and really people were really confused. What does 150 grams per kilometre mean? People didn't really get that. So we set up this website which looked at life cycle emissions of cars. So that's not just what's coming out of the tailpipe, but also what was embodied in producing the car and producing the fuel. And it wasn't just CO2, it was also air quality. So both sides of the emissions. And we created this life cycle rating from 0 to 100 and applied it to all the cars. So people could come in and go, this car is 20 or this car is 80, and kind of get the idea that on a environmental basis, how that worked. That was our scale. It's called the Next Green Car Rating. So my co-founder of Zapmap, Ben Lane, he created that. It was his brainchild. He's a very clever physicist. He created that, and then we applied it to the database of 50,000 or so cars. So I think that was what was new that we did. And we had hundreds of thousands of users who'd come in, they'd work out their emissions, their car tax, they'd compare one car against another. But then, of course, it all changed in about 2012 when effectively we knew then that electric cars were going to be the winners, that it was their time.
What did that mean in terms of your business trajectory and what you were building and continuing to innovate? Did you have to change a lot?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's when we first had the idea of Zapmap. So we started to create loads more content on the website. So effectively, it was a digital marketing property funded by advertising, but we created a lot more pages all around electric cars. We did a lot of SEO optimization, lots of blogs, news stories about electric cars. Still covered a little bit of the others, but increasingly found ourselves talking about electric cars. 3 iconic cars came to the market: Nissan Leaf, BMW i3, and the Renault Zoe. So there was already the Teslas, but those were pretty affordable. And that I think it was a real moment in time. So we thought, right, people need to find charging.
What was the next step?
We just thought, right, we need to show people where chargers are, because they're going to be out and about in their EVs. And remember, the range of cars at that time was only around, sometimes only about 80 miles. So really, if they were going on a long journey, they definitely needed a public charge.
Yep.
So we created very, very low tech spreadsheet. Here's all where the chargers are, did a bit of desk research, created a Google map, which we put within the bigger nextgreencar.com. And Ben had this brilliant moment of calling it Zapmap. We called it Zapmap on the page. And then over the next couple of years, it became a really big page for us.
Besides website viewership and people coming onto it, what were the markers that this was being used and being used well by people and that the uptake was good?
We could just see the reaction to it, and people would email us and say, you've missed this charger, or I really want to see this as an app. And so we got a lot of user feedback, and we could just see the sheer number of charge points that were being installed. And we could see that there was a real need to be able to aggregate these across networks. New networks were coming out. We needed to simplify that complexity.
Going from a website to an app, it sounded like it was kind of inevitable. How easy was it?
Well, it was definitely a challenge. So the step before going to the app was we created Zapmap as a map, a desktop map, and a whole load of content around it. Because what we'd learned from Next Green Car was, yes, you can just create a property, but really to get people to come in, you needed to have a really good digital footprint. So we also knew it was very early in the transition. People needed to know information about what's CCS, what's CHAdeMO, Type 1, Type 2. They needed to understand this. And actually, it hasn't really changed in 10 years. That is still the case now. There's still all those new people who are coming to EVs now all need that information as well. So we created a whole load of guides and contents around it. We put Zapmap as a web map at the core of it. And then people wanted an app. And actually, at the time, we had no idea how to create an app, but we were good at websites, but didn't know how to create an app. We went out, found a freelancer who was an app guy, gave him some money. He created the app. We actually saw it as a really good revenue stream. So we initially priced it at $4.99, I think it was. And although the volume didn't come, it actually, and ultimately, obviously, we made it free. It actually worked quite well because we made enough money to do version 2. And then we made it free.
What was the process for version 2?
Version 1 was very simple. It literally was a map showing where the charge points with real basic information. but we knew that was before we had live data. So we knew that community feedback was really at the core.
Yeah.
So at that point we added, can't remember the exact sequence, but we added in a chat functionality, which allowed people to add comments, add photos, really help other users. And that's continued to be a real core focus of what we do. And then the second thing that we did at around that time was to start to incorporate live data, which was really a big shift in the product. So drivers could come and they, instead of just going, yes, there's a charge point, they could see, oh, is it available? Is someone charging? Is it out of service? So that was a big step forward. And
then, of course, you've got the app for vehicle dashboard displays. As someone who drives a vehicle that doesn't have a screen built into it, it's quite, I drive sort of a van, so it's different to a more modern car. The Zapmap app, I'm assuming, with CarPlay is something that you can see on the dashboard in front of you as well, right?
Yes, it's not sort of mirroring the app, because actually Apple and Google have some very strict design requirements.
Right, okay.
For safety reasons. So you can't actually put the app on, but so you have to create a version of the app, which is very sort of simple and a few buttons. So it's not a hugely rich experience, but it does the job. It shows you where the chargers are, and people like it. People want to use CarPlay and Android Auto, as opposed to generally the car manufacturers' navigation systems don't have great data.
Right.
So it's an alternative.
You called yourself a data geek. In terms of interfacing with the rest of the supply chain to make this stuff work and get that live data, what was the process for that, and what are some of the challenges you found in the process of building up partnerships with other organizations?
At the beginning, there was maybe 10 or so charge point operators, so people who ran some form of charging network. And we knew pretty early on that having live data was a critical thing. So we'd go out to the networks and say, here we are with Zapmap, we'd like your data, please, because we can help EV drivers. And generally, all of them said, no, this is our data. We want to keep it. We want to own the customer. Okay. And then finally, we spoke to a great guy, David Martell, who was the CEO of ChargeMaster, it was called at the time. We went and met him, and he kind of got it. He got that in order to really help EV drivers, they needed this data and they needed it aggregated across networks. At the time, that was the biggest network. So he said yes. We integrated with ChargeMaster, which subsequently became BP Pulse, but it was ChargeMaster at the time. And then it's like a sort of bit of a domino effect. Once you get one person on board, then people go, oh, okay, ChargeMaster's doing that. Oh, I see. That looks good. They've got their logo up there. They've got a page on Zapmap and then it sort of started to go from there.
You said the app started off as $4.99 and then it went free afterwards. Talking more about funding, when you did your 2 rounds, I think it was 2 rounds of funding between 2019, 2020 or 2022?
2022, yeah. What
was that process like as a company in a disruptive industry? And how did you win it?
Well, we kind of, there were 6 of us doing both Next Green Car and Zapmap. We were very stretched. We knew there was a huge amount of opportunities. We get people wanting to work with us, wanting to be able to associate with our brand. They wanted to get out to the EV drivers, and we were overwhelmed with the amount of opportunities. So we could see that there was, we had something here, and there was a real need as the market was growing. Although, of course, at the time it was still tiny, but we thought it was growing a lot then. We got some board members on board, which actually really helped us, gave a bit of advice, and then we went out to try and find funding. It probably took about 18 months from when we started to actually closing the funding. We had 2 or 3 different term sheets from various organizations. One couple we walked away from, one they walked away from us. So it was quite a long process, I would say. But then we met Good Energy, met Juliet Davenport, the CEO of Good Energy, and she just sort of got it because she is in this space, 100% renewable energy company. Our missions were very much aligned. And, it was great that they came on board and became our sort of major shareholder.
You received the funding. What were your priorities with that?
Priorities really were at that time to create a more professional development team. So we hired a whole load of developers. We had 1 app developer. We managed to expand the team to 2, maybe 3. We needed a bit of business support. So really it was about getting people so we could develop the product.
You are COO. What does that role involve, and how is your interests, as you say, in product over time, aimed you as a professional into what you're focusing on?
I'm no longer so deeply involved in the app. Obviously, I know what's going on, but we've got a head of products. That is his job, and he is focused on that. I'm more focused now on the overall insights, so using the data that comes out of the app really to help businesses and government to electrify. So the mission of the app is to help EV drivers when they're out and about, give them confidence. And really the data side, Zapmap Insights, is more about using that data so that we can help companies to electrify, think about how to invest, and understand where they should be putting in charge points.
Do you have any case studies of any businesses you've helped that stand out as good testaments to the mission with Zapmap's B2B services?
I mean, we work with lots of different businesses over the spectrum, from charge point operators to DNOs, government, consultancies. I mean, one of our long-standing partners is Osprey Charging. They were actually our very first payment partner as well, so we've worked very closely with them over the years. And we've worked with them to provide market share data, show where charge points are being put in. So when they're thinking about their rollout, they can sort of see what the best place is to put them in.
When you faced the initial challenges of just getting other people on board, has this particular relationship kind of cascaded into other ones as well?
I mean, certainly on the payment side. So again, it's like a bit like ChargeMaster were for the live data. Osprey were our first partner for payment. So we work very closely with them. They've always been a network which has been open. Their philosophy is, we've got some chargers. We want any EV drivers to come and use our chargers. So they've always been very open to working with third parties, which has been great. So I think in anything, what you need the first one. And of course, once you've got one, others follow.
Where is Zapmap in operation? Is it just the UK? Is it beyond? How have you expanded? What method? And has there been any kind of strategy behind which areas you move into and which ones first?
The number of EV drivers is growing all the time, 36% up compared to the beginning of this year. So latest data, 25% of all new cars were electric in November, which is, amazing development of the market. So our primary goal is to help those drivers when they're out and about. So we've been developing the product. We've added from live data to payment to routing, and then adding lots of ways that drivers can sort of locate the best charger for them. So whether that's, journey plan for longer journeys, or whether it's a lamppost charger on their street. So that's our sort of primary focus. Then the insights business. So again, we've developed that product. We used to just have a few spreadsheets, a bit of market share data. We've developed those products. We have location products, utilization, pricing, reliability. We productized our offering. In terms of international, we've done loads of research there. We have points across Europe, Germany, France, Netherlands, and also actually in America, but we're not actively pushing out into those territories at the moment. We're focusing very much on the UK.
You mentioned about interfacing or relationship with the government. What value does Zapmap provide, and vice versa, for the EV industry on a government level?
We provide data to the Department for Transport, which they publish every quarter. So that is official statistics, so that they can both use that to drive policy, but also to put them out in the public domain so other people can see how the charge point market is developing at a reasonably granular level.
Are there any sort of roadblocks in terms of policy that's stopping Zapmap and its partners from getting where they want to go for the long term?
Well, that's a big question. Policy and EVs and charging. I think overall the government have been pretty supportive about EVs. EVs are a key plank of their net zero strategy. Transport is 28% of all CO2 emissions. Passenger cars, around 50% of that. So it is a key plank of their strategy. And the government has been pretty supportive over the years, from the plug-in car grant to supporting charging, et cetera, et cetera. So policies at the moment, the critical one at the moment is the ZEV mandate, so the zero emission vehicle mandate, which mandates car manufacturers to sell a certain proportion of their cars to be fully electric each year. So this year, 2024, it's 22%, next year, 28%, and then it rises to 80% by 2030. So it's actually quite a innovative bit of policy, and no one else around the world is trying this. So, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. But I think it's good. It's pushing the manufacturers to really prioritize the UK market for their sales, which is great, to be a bit keener on pricing, but it has had some pushback. And then on the demand side, so for the consumers, there is the 2030 ban on sales of cars solely being an important word, driven by petrol and diesel. So there's a whole load of politics there. Rishi Sunak pushed it back to 2035. Labour government bring it to 2030. The couple of unknowns. One is to what extent hybrids and plug-in hybrids are going to be included. So there's a consultation out there now. But it is actually incredibly important bit of policy, because it gives consumers the thought that, oh, this is coming. I need to be thinking about this. Because when it went back to 2035, the searches on Auto Trader, which is sort of a leading indicator of demand, searches for electric cars just went through the floor because people were, I don't need to think about that now. And once the 2030 ban is back in place, people go, okay, that's coming soon. Right, I need to start researching, thinking about it. So those are a couple of bits of policy, but then there's also a lot of policy in terms of charging points. So on the car side, you've got the ZEV mandate and the 2030 ban on sales of new petrol and diesel cars. And you've also got demand policies, for example, salary sacrifice, which makes cars cheaper for people buying, via companies. And the reason that those car policies are so important for the charging market is really it's two sides of one coin, because the charging market absolutely needs certainty because they are investing. Rolling out a 10 charger high-powered hub costs a huge amount of money. So they need to have certainty that the EV drivers are going to be coming and using those sites. So it's sort of two sides of every coin. And then also on the policy side, there's two key policies in place at the moment. One is the Rapid Charging Fund. So that's all about how to get grid to the major motorway services so that we can have at least 6 high-powered 150 kilowatt chargers at every single MSA in England, 114 of them. The moment about half have them, they still have chargers, but not 6. So that's a fund, hasn't yet been spent, but an important area. And then the second area is LEVI, local electric vehicle infrastructure. And that's £450 million. And that's all about getting it out to the local level, installing on-street chargers, and really to support those people who don't have off-street parking.
Okay, that £450 million is coming from where? How's it being used? Can you unravel that bit?
Yeah, sure. So £450 million coming from the government, so coming from OZEV, Department for Transport. These may not be exact numbers, but I believe 330 million is actually for the charging infrastructure. And then there's another amount which is supporting local authorities to sort of more on the operational side. So they can hire someone within the local authority to become a sort of EV expert. So, education.
Yeah.
So that is being rolled out across the 300 local authorities across the UK. Everyone gets some money. So the previous scheme, you actually had to apply for it. But this, everyone is allocated a certain amount of money and they have to say, thanks for my money. This is how I'm going to spend it, and put it out to tender. Charge point operators respond to the tender. They select an operator and then they roll out. Reality is the process has taken a little while. So 2 years probably since this funding was announced. Tenders are now starting to go out, but we should see tens of thousands of chargers, on-street chargers across the UK beginning to roll out towards the end of next year.
When those chargers have been rolled out, what organisations are in charge of reviewing how successful of a rollout that was and, user uptake and things like that? Who's taking that data in?
So the government have some targets in terms of infrastructure, and then they have bodies who kind of go, to what extent has those targets been hit? I mean, I'm a little bit sceptical about too many targets, because I think a critical thing with charging is that not all charge points are created equal. So you've got, on the on-street side, you can have a lamppost charger.
Yeah.
So on a street to help someone who hasn't got off-street parking, 5.5 kilowatts. The other end, you've got high-powered chargers, which might be at motorway services or just off a major junction or local charging hub, 300 kilowatts.
Right.
So you can see, wow, those are entirely different use cases. One is for overnight charging. One is, I want to charge up as quickly as I can to get back on my journey. So when you have a target saying we need X thousand charge points, it kind of doesn't really make sense, because a 5.5 is not the same as a 300 kilowatt. So it's about getting the right chargers in the right place so that EV drivers can be confident to charge up when they need to. And also those people who are going to be switching to electric vehicles, they see these chargers and they become confident. They go, okay, they might look at Zapmap and go, right, I can see that there's chargers here. That's giving me confidence. I can make the switch.
Do you have any reservations about the way that chargers have been rolled out so far? Would you have done it differently?
Well, here we are 10 years in. I think probably most people, had we gone back 10 years and saw where we've got to now, would have done it slightly differently. But, in a way, we are where we are. It was maybe a little bit piecemeal. Maybe the government could have taken a bit more of a strong direction 10 years ago. But, we are where we are and we've got to move forward. And the reality is the vast majority of the charge point infrastructure is being powered by private investment. And then it's supported, A, where it doesn't make sense for private companies to invest, and B, at this sort of local level, are being supported by the government. So it's a big multi-billion pound industry now.
It fascinates me what you're saying. Do you have any other sort of insights on consumer behaviour that have surprised you? Any sort of behavioural trends?
The big trend that I'm quite interested in is just the huge difference between those people who haven't got an EV and those people who have got an EV. So out in the market, people who don't have an EV, people are very concerned about lots of different things, whole range of things. When you've actually got an EV satisfaction is 87%. Only 3% say they would go back to petrol or diesel, certainly go back. And so there's this perception that there's challenges with EVs when you haven't got an EV, so people are sort of concerned about it. They say, what about charging? If you haven't got an EV, you're really concerned about it. Once you have got an EV, I'm not saying the charging is perfect, but generally people are reasonably happy.
Your roadmap for the next steps with Zapmap, what do you as someone with a passion for product want to see? There's a tendency in tech to think like, let's just keep adding features to everything that we've built, but that isn't always necessarily a good move if you've nailed down in your niche. So what's your approach and where do you want to take the company and the product next?
I think that's a really good point because we've got a list as long as your arm of little features we want to add, but it's important we don't just add them. What we've got to do is create coherent user journeys for drivers. And people often say we are now at that moment where we're moving from pioneers who are, quite techie, happy to do loads of research and really invested in their EV. And it was kind of a core part of who they are. Now we're moving to that early majority, normal day-to-day people getting in EVs, and really they're not interested in the detail. They want to get in their car, they want to be able to go and charge up, they want to, feel good about this great car that they've got, but they're not that interested in getting too involved in all the sort of the detail. So I think in terms of Zapmap, what that means is we need to evolve it to making especially the onboarding, the sort of first layer of when you come in, very, very simple, and then maybe going down to more the detail further down. In terms of developments, our current focus is we announced a partnership with Hive, which is the ecotech arm of Centrica last month. So they are moving from being, you might know them as being a sort of smart home meter kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they've shifted and they now install solar panels, air source heat pumps, EV charging. And so we have a strategic partner with them to being there away from home charging. So they're providing the home charging with the charge points. We're doing the away from home. And as part of that, we're going to be firstly giving their users some user credit. So they might have their charge point installed and then a little bit concerned about, I'm not sure about going to charge away from home. So we're giving them some money to help on that, but also a simple RFID card so that Hive, powered by Zapmap, and also paying within the app. So helping them on the public network.
Again, just going back to like the long-term vision beyond this specific partnership and drawing a line in the sand between which features to add and which not to, what else do you see for the long-term future of Zapmap?
Zapmap will not look like it is at the moment. In the long term, there will be there's already tens of thousands of chargers, but probably hundreds of thousands of chargers, and they will be out on the network. So we will be evolving the product to be part of an electric vehicle driver's sort of day-to-day life, whether that's linking up home charging, linking up charging on the public network. Pricing is going to become a lot more important as we get more competition in the market. People are going to be doing a lot of games with pricing, loyalty, all those types of things. It's about becoming a sort of companion for your end-to-end charging experience.
I've got one question that I want to ask, but I feel like you probably get asked all the time. And that's, what does Tesla's development and the kind of brand journey, how has that impacted the rest of the EV space? Because they've nailed it. They've got a very charismatic and eccentric personal brand called Elon Musk leading the whole thing. But at the same time, they seem to be we're doing it on our own and you can kind of fall by the wayside if you don't keep up with us approach to all sorts of things. What's been your experience of the Tesla movement?
Tesla has been the big disruptor, hasn't it, in the industry? I mean, that's undisputed. It's come in, it's created from scratch an electric car that people love, and a whole load of people are, they're very proud to be Tesla drivers. It's aspirational. And then in parallel, their masterstroke was to create the supercharger network. EV drivers who are not Tesla drivers just look with envy at those sort of banks of Tesla superchargers around. But of course, that is now changing as well. So of all their chargers across the UK, half of those are now open to any brand of EV. And I think that they will be they're planning to open them all up. The other thing that every year we at Zapmap do a survey. to our drivers. And in fact, we've been doing it for 7 years. So we've got a sort of longitudinal study on how drivers' attitudes have changed. And one of the things we ask is all around satisfaction with the different charging point networks and reliability, accessibility, ease of use, cost, that type of thing. And Tesla generally comes top. We've asked the question, but we've already excluded them because they were a closed network. This time, for the first time, we've included them in the ranking because they have over half of their chargers are open to everyone. But people love the experience. You know, it's the hubs. For Tesla drivers, they can go in, plug and charge. They don't even need to use any cards, any apps. It's just plug and charge. It is what people are looking for, is the Tesla-like experience. So I think it's great that they're there sort of showing the way. But of course, it's just one charger to one car.
Yeah.
Getting that plug and charge experience across multiple cars, multiple charging points is going to be a challenge. But that is where we'll be in 5 years' time or so.
It strikes me as a noob to this that the move to make their chargers usable to everyone feels like a small first win for the rest of the industry. What does that look like further down the line in them being maybe more cohesive industry players?
In the early days, they were the only ones who had these amazing charging hubs. But now, actually, the other operators have really caught up. So, you know, you see banks of GridServes, Ionity, Instavolt, Osprey, MFG. So it's not as though they're the only ones providing these hubs. So at some level, I think they're going, well, actually, Tesla drivers have a choice now. So we want to make sure we're getting a share of the EV drivers.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I think they are a little bit separate. When we go to industry events, you don't have Tesla people there. They're a little bit separate. We'll see what happens with them, I guess.
What about dealers? Where do they stand in this?
They're independent companies and they are the ones selling the cars. This is the first point of contact that many would-be EV drivers have. As the market develops, we'd want to see dealers probably more informed about charging and helping. It's no longer just selling a car. It's also selling the car plus, by the way, these are the 10 first things you should do. Get a home charger, download Zapmap, think about, hear them different networks. There's different types of charging. This is what a kilowatt is, those types of things. So I think a lot of this transition is about education. It's not just about, here's a shiny new car. This is how it's going to fit into your life and this is how we can help you.
Have there been any parallels you didn't expect between developing the B2C product and developing the B2B product? Is there anything you were surprised that they're actually quite similar in terms of challenges you had to solve?
At the core, they both rely on a really good data set. So at the core of what Zapmap does is it integrates 60 or more charge point operators into one place, makes the data good, adds value to the data, make sure it's consistent. That is at our core. And then it serves both the app and insights. There are slightly different requirements for each one. So, for example, the app, the location categories are really important in terms of finding a motorway services or finding a hotel. Whereas maybe for the insights, it's more at a aggregated level. It's more, is this on street? Is this a journey charger? So there's different bits of data are more or less important to the driver, but there's definitely a relationship between them. So we've got our survey, which we do every year, which is about the EV drivers telling us various things, how often they charge, which charging points they like. And then we've got the actual data from the charge points, so all the utilization data. So they're 2 points looking at the same question, I guess.
Yeah.
So what are the most popular places to charge? The EV drivers say one thing and the data says something else. Yeah, often similar, but
Sure.
You then got to think about, what does that mean? Is that because there's vans? Are there a lot of fleet operators? What's the difference?
When you've got those two different data sets, what are you doing to interpret and pick apart why they've come with different results? What's the process for that?
Look at the survey results and try and think, okay, what is the audience segmentation under this? Just done a presentation yesterday and one question was, which I've mentioned, what's your satisfaction with an EV? 87%. What's your satisfaction with charging? 64%. So I was thinking, now, is there a difference there between people who have off-street parking and people who don't? Because that's a sort of critical segment. Because those people who have off-street parking, they charge at home and they use the network maybe 20% of the time. But clearly, if you don't have off-street parking, you're very reliant on the public network. So is there a difference? Amazingly, no difference. And I was like, wow, that is weird. And then similarly, in terms of, do you have any challenges with the public charging network? It's reliability, number of chargers, cost are the sort of the three key ones. And I was thinking, is there going to be a difference between those segments? No. So again, that was a bit disappointing. But then I looked at how often do you charge on the public network? And there it was good to see, because it's intuitively right that if you have got off-street parking, you're charging on average about once a month. If you don't have off-street parking, much, much more. So maybe around once a week. So there was a big difference. So in terms of the data, we look at the core results overall, and then we try and segment. And the other segmentation is maybe, are you a new EV driver or a more established one? But we look at that and then we kind of compare it with the sort of the data on usage and just sanity check it. We're always talking to people in the market. We're thinking about trends and then thinking about what does that mean for our products, both the app and for insights.
Is it tempting to make decisions not based off of data at any point when you're developing your product? By virtue of falling in love with what you're developing as a team, do you at any points find yourselves maybe not giving as much credit where credit is due to what the data is actually saying you should do and to change things?
You'd have to talk to Ed, head of product, on that, because I think in the initial days, Ben and I just went off our gut and we said, right, this is what the product needs to be. But, we very much moved on from that. It's no longer, my personal, I'm very much stepped back from that. We've got a product team. They think about audiences. They think about segmentation. They think about user journeys. And yeah, absolutely. They use data. They talk to EV drivers to validate. So yeah, early days, gut feel, now much more sort of thought through.
It's inspiring to hear about all the progress you've made so far and the growing uptake of EVs. You can just see a load more of them on the street, for instance. What does it look like to actually complete this transition period in terms of a culture and a civilization?
Well, it's a huge shift. I think step one is getting the transition to 2030. That is a key date after which there won't be any more sales of petrol and diesel cars. Gone, finished. So that's exciting. And I've already talked about the ZEV mandate, about being the sort of stick, if you like, towards the car manufacturers. But there also needs to be, this is a big change. We need to make sure that consumers, drivers are happy and coming, making the steps themselves. And I think, what a lot of what that's about is really getting the messages out that this is not a bad thing to go to. Electric cars are quieter, better, got more torque, cheaper to run. There's so many benefits of electric cars. And so I think it's about helping consumers sort of get that information out there, I guess.
Yep.
And then at the same time, a lot of people have very understandable questions. They're, confused, a little bit confused about the dates. They're concerned about charging. They're worrying, what's this going to cost me? They're thinking, is this going to be a real pain in my life? I've heard there's not enough chargers. I've heard there's queues. I heard there's fires. I've heard there's all of that type of stuff.
Yep.
And so, and I think it's about just getting those facts out in a calm way. And when we get to 2030, so there's 1.3 million cars on the road at the moment. That's 4% of all cars. As you say, you can increasingly see them with their little green stripe on the number plate. I love spotting them, but only 4% of all cars. It's very early days. By the time we get to 2030, when no new petrol and diesel cars sold, it will still only be at about 20% of all cars. So 100% or 80 to 100% of new cars, but 20% of all cars. So there's still then a huge task from 2030 onwards. But in terms of what I'm thinking about is the next 5 million car drivers who are going to switch over to electric. And that's about positive messages, making sure that they are happy, understand, help them understand what the key benefits are and also address their concerns, I guess.
What questions would you encourage the rest of the EV industry to be asking themselves to make better decisions around this? We've talked about, using your data to make informed decisions. How can the rest of the industry make sure that they're making logical, rational decisions that are going to benefit the consumer at the end of the day?
It's about putting the driver at the heart of everything. So it's not, it is a technological change, but fundamentally it's a change in people's behaviour and what they're doing. So it's about putting the driver at the heart of everything. And that means creating a brilliant charging experience, having brilliant cars, making sure it fits into people's lives. So actually, I go to a lot of conferences and we talk about that a lot. We talk about the consumer, we talk about what they want, but there is a challenge shifting technology to being incredibly consumer focused. There are some new regulations that have just come in called the PCPR, the public charge point regulations. Second phase just came in a couple of weeks ago. And that's all about providing support for consumers, contactless payment, helplines, 99% reliability. So all of that is really good to have that as what the industry is aiming for. And when I talk to charge point operators, that is what they want to do. They want to have charge points that EV drivers want to use. So it's not as though there's any pushback, but it's just takes a little bit of time. You have the tech, and then you've got to sort of adjust the tech to make sure it's super consumer friendly, and then we're really addressing that as well as getting hearts and minds and making sure that consumers and fleets recognize the benefits and see this is a positive thing. I think other things is one is positioning the electric car as part of a bigger change. So I always like to say that electric car is a gateway drug to a decarbonized home.
Okay.
So, lots of people, they get an electric car, charging, they got a nice, maybe an EV tariff or not. And then they go, oh, wow, if I had solar panels, that's cool. Then I could be putting in my renewable energy into my electric car. Then they start thinking, maybe an air source heat pump. And it becomes a really good way to start transitioning your home. We did a survey in terms of asking our users, did you get your panels first or did you get your electric car first? And I was actually expecting most people to have got their electric car first and then their panels. But actually, it was about 50-50. So half of them got their panels and they thought, we've got all this excess energy that I'm giving back to the grid. That could charge an electric car. So I think it does go both ways. And then I think the other thing is continuing to roll out the charge point infrastructure at pace, because that's an incredibly important thing. When you ask people on the street, just say there's not enough chargers, but actually there's been a huge increase in the number of chargers over the last couple of years. If you look at Zapmap stats page, we're tracking that. You can just see how it is just shifted up a gear in the last year. And in fact, it's 2 years ago, we've now got double the number that we used to have. So a huge increase, but it needs to continue to roll out at pace to keep pace with the number of new EVs so that we don't get to a situation where there isn't enough. And also in terms of locally, we need to make sure there are solutions for those people who don't have off-street parking, because really it's a no-brainer to get an electric car if you have off-street parking. If you don't have off-street parking, that there are near-home solutions. So whether that's lamppost chargers, bollards, maybe community shared charging, local charging hubs, lots of different solutions. Through pavement charging, you might have seen Turbo Charge on Dragon's Den is another solution. But that, solving that problem is something that needs to be done. And no one quite knows what that looks like at the moment, but that will evolve.
So I'm fascinated as I'm learning more about the EV space of all these different players providing different services and products, trying to move the barrel forwards in tandem with each other. And I guess my question to you, to kind of before we finish off, is who is leading the way? Who is falling behind? And how do you ensure synchronicity between all these different supply chain partners in rolling out new EV infrastructure?
The good thing is that there's lots of companies in this space, and the majority of them are very much purpose-driven. I mean, we at Zapmap are very purpose-driven, clearly. We are trying to help that transition. And actually, most of the companies in this space are very much purpose-driven. So there's a lot of conferences, there's a lot of collaboration. But of course, people have slightly different angles on it. So I think it's about keeping open, identifying what are the key things in policy that need to happen to unlock the investment, either in charging point infrastructure or the car rollout, and keeping open dialogue. And there are organisations that the industry is maturing. There are organisations like Charge UK, so they now talk as one voice, or broadly one voice for the charge point operators. So instead of charge point operators individually either going to government or talking to the grid services, they can act as one voice and really sort of try and knock over the barriers one by one, whether that's planning or whether it's making sure they have easier access to the grid connections. So I think the industry is maturing, but it's about collaborating, talking together, sort of what was like being, there's a phrase about when you're competitors but friends. Frenemies is wrong because that's about friends, but there's something about competitors but yet collaborating at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think that, and there's a lot of evidence of that happening. There's the grid, charge point operators, car OEMs, people like us, digital players, there's people in the home, and a lot of people are talking together a lot. But, that is the challenge, isn't it? How do we move to delivery? We know the solutions. How do we deliver it out into the market in an effective, quick way?
What have you learned about yourself as a professional through this incredible journey that has been Zapmap so far?
As a person, I've definitely been through different phases, from initially when it was just Ben and I, very much both at the coalface doing everything, to getting some money and being able to hire some people to do some things, but still very cost constrained, to when we then got our Series A funding, we were able to expand significantly and get people like HR and more support, legal support. So I think through that, I've really enjoyed changing my skills and trying to think about how I move from being very much hands-on to trying to more help others develop and take more of a sort of leadership role, as opposed to trying to get involved in everything. If you ask the team, I think they'd like me to be less involved in the detail, but that is what I'm constantly trying to do, is to trying to move back a bit and look at the direction.
We're going to move now to what we call Quickfire Curiosity, which is our short, a little bit philosophical trivia to end off with. First question of which being, would you consider yourself a futurist?
No, I wouldn't say. I don't think I'm a futurist. I think I'm quite a pragmatic person. Although I do have a vision of a beautiful, clean world with lovely charging hubs, decarbonised homes. So maybe a little bit of a futurist, getting, linking all the panels and the air source heat pumps and everything, and, having energy security. So on that side, I think I'm a futurist. But actually, I feel I'm quite a sort of grounded, practical person.
That sounds like a good balance to me. You're face to face with your younger self. You're just entering the working world. You've come out of education, and you can give 30 seconds of advice to that young person. What do you say?
I'd say, don't worry that you've absolutely got no idea what you're going to do. You're going to have a few jobs, which will be okay. But then when you're 40, you're suddenly going to find an industry that you love, with people you love, and you're going to hit your stride.
Amazing. For people looking at the renewable energy sector, maybe specifically the EV sector, given it's your interest and focus, what questions would you encourage them to ask themselves to spot the best opportunities? So just having a bit of self-reflection, really, because I find, it's all well and good getting advice from other people, but a lot of the time in an age where we're so bombarded with opinions and information, sometimes we just need to actually ask ourselves relevant questions. So what questions should people be asking themselves in their career pivotal moments?
I mean, I've got three teenagers, and so they're all thinking about this type of thing now. And, they're all quite tense because they've got to do their student loans, which, by the way, I never had. So that, so work is quite a kind of worry for them. And I think it's about thinking about, what do you like doing? What are your skills? I think playing to your strength rather than trying to create a career that you think you should have.
Yes.
I mean, but I'm not 100% sure about necessarily doing something that's your passion, because then, if you love, I don't know, traveling, or you love art or something, trying to make money out of that, I think, trying to create a career out of that isn't necessarily great unless you're incredibly motivated on that.
And also, you can kind of develop a passion from the positive feedback loop you get from getting good at something, right?
Yes.
So you might not enjoy something to start with, but if you do enough of it and get good at it, you suddenly find it more rewarding, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. At the end of it, all of it's about people, isn't it? In this sort of more virtual world, it's not quite the same, but you have to interact with people for 8 hours a day. So try and find something where you like the people. And some people are broadly extroverts, so they're feeding off other people. But some people are introverted, so they've got a different consideration. So maybe think about oneself. Are you someone who wants to be out with people, or are you actually want to do something a little bit more closed in?
What's been your most unexpected learning of your career around the electric vehicle world? And how has it shaped your view of the world on a more existential level?
These are tricky questions just to fire at me, with not being able to think about them. What lessons have I learned? I think one thing that I've learned, it may seem a bit trivial, but when we were in the depths of being, having no extra support, I would find I'd be doing everything, and some of these little things would take a disproportionate amount of time. When we had a little bit more money, we started using different bits of software, and it's just a silly example, but I think the learning is there are solutions out there, not always be someone who's doing everything. There are tools out there just to help you in many ways.
Melanie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I'm really excited to continue to learn more about Zapmap and see the footprint you guys leave on the industry. So thank you for taking the time.
It's been fun. Thanks for your questions.